Hi, I'm Mr. Wallace, and the topic of today's video lesson is community interactions. So today we'll be looking at the ways in which different populations interact within communities. As we saw from the first lesson, communities are made up of all the different populations living in an area. So all the different populations of plants, whatever different bacteria types or animals, fungi, whatever different living things live in a particular area are part of the community, and they're all going to interact with each other some way. So some of these interactions are obvious, like predation, one animal eating another. But a lot of these interactions are not quite so obvious, so we're going to go over those here. So the types of different interactions, we have basically three. There's the obvious one, predation, and from there we got carnivory and herbivory. Okay, carnivory is what you think of when you think of predators and prey, one animal hunting down and killing another and eating it. Herbivory is also predation. You've got one organism eating another. It's just that in this case the thing being eaten is a plant. So the hunter in this case doesn't actually have to go out and hunt and catch its prey. It simply has to go out and find it. So those are types of predation. Competition is when two or more organisms are competing for the same resource. And the last one is symbiosis. And symbiosis means living together. Sym is together and bio is life, so it's living together. So these are all, mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism, are all types of interactions in which different organisms are living together. They're stuck together. So the first of these is predation. So obviously the predator is going to affect the prey. If a population of reindeer is eating grass, then the reindeer should drive the grass population down. So the predator is obviously going to affect the prey. But what's interesting is that the prey, we find, also affects the predator. And an example of this is St. Paul Island, which is a small rocky island off the coast of Alaska, several hundred kilometers off the coast of Alaska. The reindeer were introduced to this island back in about 1912 or so, and just 29 reindeer were first introduced, and those reindeer reproduced, and they found lots of lichen, lots of grasses on this island, and so they reproduced slowly at first, and then faster and faster. And so what we see is almost a perfect exponential graph right here, exponential growth curve. And what we find, though, is that as the reindeer population increases, suddenly there's more reindeer eating the grass, eating the lichens that are on this island, and so the island is going to begin to run out of plants. And as the island runs out of plants, then what we see is this massive die-off of the reindeer. The island is no longer capable of supporting almost 2,000 reindeer. And so we see the reindeer die off rapidly. So in this case, the predator affects the prey population. The reindeer killed off most of the plants on the island, but in turn then, the lack of plants killed off the reindeer. So the prey is also going to be affecting the predator. We see the same sort of pattern occur with the lynx and the snowshoe hare, which is a really well-studied example of predation and predatory effects up in Canada. The lynx and the hare were both hunted for their pelts, for their fur, back in the 1800s up through about 1935. And because the trappers would sell their pelts to fur traders, the fur traders would keep really good records of how many pelts they bought of each type and where and when and all that. And so we've got really good, accurate numbers that show what happens to the snowshoe hare populations over time. And what we see is that whenever the snowshoe hare population peaks, right behind it a year or two, the lynx population is going to peak. And as the lynx population peaks, suddenly there's lots of lynxes around, and so the snowshoe hares begin to decrease, and the snowshoe hare population is going to go down. And as the snowshoe hare population goes down, suddenly it becomes really hard to be a lynx because there's not very much food around. So the lynx population is going to shrink. And so we've got this cycle where the prey population will go up, and because there's a lot of prey, then the lynx population, the predator population, will go up. And as the predator population goes up, they're going to kill more prey, and so the prey population goes down. And consequently, the predator population goes down. And you get this alternating cycle that carries out, and it's pretty clear here, for the next 100 years after this. And we see that then the important takeaway message from this is that the predator affects the prey population, but the prey population is also going to have a strong effect on the predator population. So there's definitely an interaction between the two organisms in communities. Competition is a really important type of interaction between organisms in a community. You could be competing for a variety of different resources. A real common one would be food. In this particular case, we've got a grassland community. These are animals that are found in grasslands. And so we got this mouse here, and pretty much everything eats mice. So we got hawks and owls and snakes, gopher snake, rattlesnakes would also eat them, coyotes, foxes, lots of different organisms eat these mice, and so they would all be competing for these mice, and in fact they do compete for the mice. But there's this important idea in ecology that no two organisms can compete directly head-to-head for the same resource, because if they do, then one of the organisms is going to be better at getting it, and therefore they're going to drive the other organism out of existence. And so what we see is that competition forces organisms and communities to adopt a certain niche. And what a niche is an organism's role in the ecosystem. So the niche is basically how an organism lives. The habitat is where it lives, the niche is how it lives. How does the animal or plant get nutrients, get sunlight, get water, get food? How does it survive in its ecosystem? And so that's the organism's niche. And to avoid direct competition between different populations of organisms, what we end up with then is that each organism has a particular niche that it fits into. So, for example, we've got up here hawks that eat these owls, and hawks. And they both eat the mice, they both live in trees, generally on the edges of grasslands, and so they have very, very similar habitat, they have very, very similar ways of surviving in their ecosystem, but there's one important difference, and that is that owls hunt at night, they're nocturnal. And hawks hunt during the day, so they are diurnal. So this one small change, when they hunt, is enough to make it so that they're not competing directly for the resource, in this particular case, for the deer mouse. Okay, so they're hunting at slightly different times, so they're both able to survive in this community then. Competition also then is going to affect population size. So if the gopher snake population goes up drastically, and so they start to eat a lot of these deer mice, then that is then in turn going to affect all of these other organisms. There's going to be fewer deer mice available for the hawks, for the owls, for the coyote, and so what we'd see then is that those populations would have to do one of two things. Either decrease because there's not enough food, or switch to feeding on something else. Start eating, rabbits or something else if they can. And so we're going to see competition for resources is going to have widespread effects throughout communities. Symbiosis is the last kind of interaction between organisms, and as I said, sym is together, or bio is living or life, and so this is a relationship in which different organisms are going to be living together. So in the classic example of symbiosis would be the bumblebee or the bee and the flower. Okay, so the bee is going to get food out of this relationship, and the flower is going to get a source of fertilization. So both of these organisms are going to benefit, and in that case then this would make it a mutualistic relationship, or an example of mutualism. Mutualism then is when both species are helped by the relationship. So the clownfish and the sea anemone, clownfish gets protection against predators, sea anemone gets the ammonia that the fish puts out, it also is going to be protected against certain predators of the sea anemone. These birds go along on the backs of animals on the savannah. This is a bird that's on the back of a zebra, but they also are a lot of times found on the backs of rhinos or hippos, that sort of thing. And they basically eat the parasites, eat the insects off of the animal. So the bird gets a source of food, and the animal gets cleaned of parasites, gets cleaned of insects, so it's healthier. So again, mutualism, both species benefit. Commensalism is when one organism is going to benefit from the relationship, and the other one really doesn't care that much. It doesn't really affect them. And so in that case, this is an example of commensalism. We've got cattle egrets, these large white birds. And they eat the insects that are churned up as herd animals walk across the grass, across the dirt, across marshes, whatever. Those herd animals are going to be kicking up the dirt. They're going to be exposing insects that are hiding in the plants and in the dirt. So the cattle egrets just go along after them and eat those insects that are now exposed, easy pickings. So the cattle egret gets a source of food. The herd animal is not affected by this at all. They're just they're just the source of exposing the insects. So they don't really feel anything at all. We got the whale here, large whale with barnacles on the side. Again, you got this huge whale. It's not going to be affected by a little barnacle living on its side. But the barnacle, all it's got to do then to get food is just put out its web. It doesn't have to chase down food or anything, because the whale swimming through the ocean, as it puts out its little antenna thing, then the food is going to be caught. The barnacle is going to get food out of this, and it has to do very little work to do that, to get food. So the whale doesn't get affected by this relationship, but the barnacle gets a source of food. Similarly, in the plant kingdom, you got this large tree in the rainforest and vines growing up the side, or a lot of times it'll be orchids or epiphytes, flowers, that sort of thing. And those things are just basically using the tree as a way, as like a ladder, to get up closer to the sunlight, up near the canopy of the forest. So the plant growing on the tree, vine or epiphyte or orchid or whatever, is going to get a nice position, get more sun, and some support perhaps in the case of the vine. But the tree it's not affected by this little plant growing on the side of it at all. It doesn't care at all. So those are examples of commensalism where one is benefited and the other has no effect. Parasitism is, you see the word parasite in there, so this one should be pretty clear. Obvious example, the tick in a large animal. Okay, tick is going to get in, it's going to live on the deer or other large animal, bear or whatever, and it's going to get into that animal and it's going to suck its blood, suck its fluids out. So the animal has the increased chance of getting diseases, it loses nutrients in its blood and so forth. So the large animal is going to be harmed by the parasite, and the parasite gets a meal and a place to live. So this is one animal is helped, the other one is harmed. This is an example of a cowbird. This is a brown-headed cowbird egg in, I believe, a warbler's nest. And so what brown-headed cowbirds do is they're going to go along and instead of actually building their own nest and using energy to raise their own young, they're going to drop an egg into the nest of some other bird and let that bird raise its young. And so the cowbird egg is going to hatch. And what actually makes this a parasite is that the cowbird as it hatches is going to be larger than the other birds. It's going to be more aggressive. A lot of times they're going to hatch earlier, so they'll have a couple-day head start on the other birds. And therefore, the cowbird baby is going to have an advantage. So when the mother bird brings food back for her babies, the cowbird is going to get most of it. And consequently, the mother's babies are going to have a much reduced chance of survival. A lot of them are going to end up getting killed off, either killed off directly by the bird or killed off by lack of nutrition because they're not able to compete with the cowbird for food. Here we've got mistletoe growing on the oak tree. And again, this is a case of a plant growing on another plant, but unlike this case down here of commensalism, the mistletoe tree actually does put these little suckers into the oak tree that it grows on and sucks nutrition out of the oak tree. So in this particular case, the mistletoe gets a place to live and a source of food, and the oak tree is actually having its nutrition sucked away from it. It's having its water and nutrients sucked out of it, so it actually is less healthy. So this is an example of parasitism. And those are the examples of different types of interactions within communities. So that's it.